The thunder crashed so loud that Jake Morrison jumped out of his chair. Rain hammered against the windows of his ranch house like angry fists. He had lived in Arizona for 42 years, but storms like this still made him nervous. The wind howled through the desert, bending the old oak tree near his porch until he thought it might snap. Jake walked to the kitchen window and peered out into the darkness. Lightning lit up the sky for a split second, showing him his cattle huddled together under the shelter he had built for them. At least they were safe. His barn stood strong against the storm, just like his grandfather had built it to do. He was about to return to his coffee when he heard something strange. A sound that didn't belong with the thunder and rain. It came from the direction of the barn. Jake paused, listening carefully. There it was again, a soft thud like something heavy falling. Maybe a board had come loose in the wind. Or perhaps one of his tools had fallen from the workbench. Jake grabbed his yellow raincoat from the hook by the door. He pulled on his boots and picked up the flashlight from the kitchen counter. As an afterthought, he reached for his rifle. Living alone on a ranch meant being prepared for anything. The rain soaked through his coat within seconds of stepping outside. The wind tried to push him back toward the house, but Jake pressed forward. His boots splashed through puddles as he made his way across the muddy yard to the barn. The barn door was slightly open. Jake frowned. He always kept it closed and latched. The wind must have blown it open, he thought. But as he got closer, he noticed something that made his heart beat faster. The latch wasn't broken by the wind. Someone had opened it from the inside. Jake raised his rifle and clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness inside the barn. He could smell the familiar scents of hay and old wood, mixed with something else, something metallic that he couldn't place. "Hello?" He called out. "Is someone in here?" Silence answered him. Except for the rain drumming on the roof above, Jake stepped carefully into the barn, his flashlight sweeping from left to right. Everything looked normal at first. His old truck sat in its usual spot. Tools hung neatly on their hooks. Bales of hay were stacked along the far wall. Then he heard it again. A soft moan, barely audible over the storm. It came from behind the hay bales. Jake's grip tightened on his rifle as he moved forward slowly. His boots made soft sounds on the dirt floor. As he rounded the corner of the haystack, his flashlight beam fell on something that made him stop breathing for a moment. A woman lay unconscious on the ground, partially hidden behind the bales. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with long black hair braided down her back. Her clothes were torn and dirty, jeans and a traditional-looking blouse with colorful embroidery. But what made Jake's stomach turn was the blood. Dark stains covered the left side of her head, and her right arm showed what looked like a fresh wound. The metallic smell he had noticed was the smell of blood. Jake lowered his rifle and knelt beside her. He checked for a pulse at her wrist, weak but steady. She was alive, but in bad shape. In the better light of his flashlight, he could see she was Native American, probably Apache based on the style of her clothing and jewelry. A beautiful silver bracelet with traditional symbols circled her wrist. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin felt cold to the touch. Jake realized she had been lying here for who knows how long, bleeding and getting weaker. If he didn't help her soon, she might not make it through the night. But questions raced through his mind. How had she gotten here? Who had hurt her? Was she running from someone dangerous? And most importantly, would helping her put his own life at risk? Jake looked at her face in the flashlight beam. Even unconscious and injured, she looked peaceful somehow, young and vulnerable. He thought about his late wife, Catherine, and what she would have said. Catherine had always believed in helping people, no matter the risk. She had volunteered at the reservation clinic before her illness, treating anyone who needed care. The decision was made. Jake couldn't leave this woman to die in his barn, no matter what trouble it might bring. He would figure out the rest later. He set down his rifle and gently slipped his arms under her body. She was lighter than he expected, but dead weight is always heavy. Jake lifted her carefully, trying not to jostle her injured head. Her hair smelled like sage and rain. The storm fought him every step of the way back to the house. Wind and rain lashed at them both as Jake struggled across the muddy yard. By the time he reached his front porch, both he and the unconscious woman were soaked through. Jake managed to get the door open and carried her inside. His warm, dry living room had never felt more welcoming. He laid her gently on his leather couch and quickly grabbed towels from the bathroom. Her lips had a blue tinge that worried him. As he dried her hair and face with a soft towel, Jake got his first really good look at her injuries. The head wound was a nasty gash above her left ear, probably from hitting something hard. The arm wound looked different, straighter and cleaner. It looked like a bullet had grazed her. Someone had shot at this woman. The realization hit Jake like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just an accident or a fall. Someone had tried to hurt her, maybe even kill her, and now she was in his house, bleeding on his couch. Jake had two choices. He could call the sheriff and let the law handle it. Or he could help her himself and ask questions later. Something in his gut told him that involving the authorities might not be the safest choice for her. If someone was hunting her, they might have connections everywhere. Thunder boomed overhead and the lights flickered. The storm wasn't letting up. Even if he wanted to get her to a hospital, the roads would be flooded by now. They were stuck here together until morning at least. Jake went to his bathroom and gathered his first aid supplies. He had plenty of experience treating injuries. Ranch life meant cuts, scrapes, and worse on a regular basis. As he cleaned her wounds with antiseptic, she stirred slightly but didn't wake up. "Hang in there," he whispered to her. "You're safe now. I don't know who you are or what happened to you, but you're safe here." Outside, the storm raged on. But inside Jake's house, a mystery woman slept fitfully on his couch while he stood guard, wondering what morning would bring to both their lives. Jake spent the rest of the night in his kitchen chair, positioned where he could watch both the front door and the woman on his couch. Every few hours he checked on her, feeling for fever, making sure she was still breathing steadily. The head wound had stopped bleeding after he cleaned and bandaged it, but he worried about a concussion. As the first gray light of dawn crept through his windows, Jake realized he had gotten himself into something bigger than he understood. This woman wasn't just hurt, she was running from something. The bullet graze on her arm proved that someone had tried to harm her with deadly force. He made coffee with shaking hands. 3 years of living alone had made him comfortable with solitude, but having an unconscious stranger in his house felt overwhelming. What if she died? What if whoever shot her came looking? Jake had always minded his own business, kept to himself since Catherine passed away. Now he was harboring someone who might bring violence to his doorstep. But every time he looked at her sleeping form, wrapped in his grandmother's quilt, his conscience won the battle with his fear. She looked so young and vulnerable. Her dark eyelashes rested against high cheekbones, and despite the injuries, he could see she was beautiful. More than that, she reminded him of the Apache women Catherine had worked with at the clinic. Strong, proud people who had faced more hardship than anyone should have to bear. Around 7 in the morning, Jake decided he needed to move her somewhere more comfortable. His guest bedroom had been Catherine's art studio before she got sick. He had cleaned it out after her death but rarely went in there. It would be quieter and more private than the living room. He gathered fresh sheets and pillows, then carefully lifted the woman again. She felt warmer now, which he took as a good sign. As he carried her down the hallway, she stirred and mumbled something in a language he didn't recognize. Apache, maybe, or Spanish. The guest bedroom still smelled faintly of Catherine's paints, even after 3 years. Jake tried not to think about it as he settled the woman into the bed. He propped her head up slightly with an extra pillow, remembering something about head injuries needing elevation. By mid-morning, Jake had convinced himself he was doing the right thing. He had always been good at taking care of injured animals, calves with broken legs, horses with cuts from barbed wire. This wasn't so different, he told himself. Just basic human decency. He was changing the bandage on her head wound when her eyes fluttered open. Jake froze, his hand still near her temple. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and filled with confusion and pain. "Where?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "You're safe," Jake said quickly, backing away to give her space. "You're in my house. I found you hurt in my barn last night." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Jake could see her body tense as awareness returned. She tried to sit up too quickly and winced, her hand going to her bandaged head. "Easy there," Jake said. "You hit your head pretty hard. You should rest." She looked at him with suspicion and fear. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Jake Morrison. This is my ranch. I don't want anything except to help you get better." He kept his voice calm and gentle, the way he would talk to a spooked horse. "You were bleeding pretty bad when I found you. Do you remember what happened?" The woman's hand moved to her injured arm, feeling the bandage there. Her eyes widened as memory seemed to return. "I have to go," she said, struggling to sit up again. "It's not safe. They'll find me." "Who will find you?" Jake asked. "Who hurt you?" But she was already trying to swing her legs over the side of the bed. The effort made her dizzy, and she had to grab the nightstand to steady herself. "I can't stay here. You don't understand. They'll hurt you too." Jake moved closer, ready to catch her if she fell. "Listen, you lost a lot of blood. You probably have a concussion. You can't just walk out of here in your condition." "Watch me," she said through gritted teeth, but when she tried to stand, her legs buckled. Jake caught her before she hit the floor. "See? You're in no shape to go anywhere." He helped her back onto the bed. "At least tell me your name, and maybe explain why someone shot at you." She studied his face for a long moment as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. "Ayanna," she finally said. "My name is Ayanna. Ayanna. That's a pretty name. What does it mean?" "Eternal blossom," she said quietly. "In my people's language. Apache?" She nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain flashed across her face. "San Carlos Apache. Or I was before." She trailed off, unwilling to say more. Jake sat down in the chair by the window, keeping his distance so she wouldn't feel trapped. "Ayanna, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, and maybe I don't need to know. But you're hurt bad, and there's a storm outside that's flooded half the county roads. Even if you wanted to leave, you couldn't get far." She was quiet for a while, looking out the window at the gray sky and falling rain. Jake could see her weighing her options, none of them good. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. Jake thought about it. "My wife used to volunteer at the reservation clinic. She always said that when someone needs help, you help them. No questions asked." He paused. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer. I guess helping you felt like something she would have wanted me to do." Ayanna's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." Jake stood up. "Look, I'm not asking you to trust me completely, but let me take care of your injuries for a few days, at least until you're strong enough to travel safely. After that, if you want to leave, I won't stop you." She considered this offer, her dark eyes never leaving his face. Jake had the feeling she was reading him, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "A few days," she agreed. "But if anyone comes looking for me, we'll deal with that if it happens," Jake said. "Right now, let's focus on getting you healthy." Over the next several hours, Jake found himself falling into the routine of caretaking that he remembered from Catherine's illness. He brought Ayanna soup and water, changed her bandages, and made sure she rested. She was a difficult patient, always alert, always listening for sounds that didn't belong. But gradually, she began to relax a little. That evening, as Jake was preparing dinner, Ayanna appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had managed to shower and change into some of Catherine's old clothes that Jake had left for her. The jeans were a little too long, and the sweater hung loose on her smaller frame, but she looked much better than she had that morning. "You should be resting," Jake said, looking up from the stove where he was heating canned soup. "I'm tired of lying down," Ayanna said, "and I wanted to thank you properly for helping me, for not calling the police." Jake noticed that she had avoided mentioning the sheriff specifically. "Interesting. You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same thing." Ayanna shook her head. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have been too afraid or too suspicious." She sat down carefully at his kitchen table. "You took a big risk bringing me into your home." Jake served her a bowl of soup and sat down across from her. Maybe, but it was the right thing to do. As they ate in comfortable silence, Jake realized that for the first time in 3 years, his house didn't feel empty. Ayanna's presence filled spaces that had been hollow since Catherine died. He didn't know what kind of danger she was running from or how long she would stay, but for now, taking care of her gave him purpose. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away tracks and keeping the world at bay. For tonight, at least, they were safe in Jake's little corner of the Arizona desert. The third morning brought clear skies and Ayanna's first real attempt to escape. Jake woke up to find the guest bedroom empty and the back door standing open. His heart raced as he grabbed his boots and ran outside in his pajamas. He found her about half a mile from the house, sitting on a large rock and breathing hard. She was still wearing Catherine's clothes, but she had her own boots back on. The morning sun caught the silver in her bracelet as she held her head in her hands. "Going somewhere?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice light despite his concern. Ayana looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I can't. I thought I could walk to the main road, but she gestured weakly at the vast desert stretching in all directions. Everything looks the same, and my head started spinning. Jake sat down on another rock nearby, giving her space but close enough to help if she needed it. The nearest neighbor is 15 miles east. The main highway is 20 miles south. You wouldn't have made it even if you were completely healthy. I have to try, she said stubbornly. Every day I stay here puts you in more danger. From who, Ayana? Maybe if you told me what we're dealing with, I could help better. She shook her head firmly. The less you know, the safer you are. Trust me on this, Jake studied her face. The fear in her eyes was real and deep. Whatever had happened to her, it had left her terrified and constantly looking over her shoulder. Okay, let's make a deal. You promise not to try running off alone again, and I promise not to ask questions about your past until you're ready to share. Ayana considered this. And when I am ready to leave? I'll drive you wherever you want to go, but not until you're healed up properly. She extended her hand to shake on it, and Jake noticed how small and cold her fingers were. The handshake sealed more than just their agreement. It was the first real trust she had shown him. Walking back to the house took much longer than Jake's run out to find her. Ayana had to stop several times to rest, and he could see the injury was affecting her more than she wanted to admit. By the time they reached the kitchen, she was pale and shaky. I'm making pancakes, Jake announced, hoping to distract her from her obvious frustration with her body's limitations. Catherine's recipe. She always said they could cure anything. As he mixed the batter, Ayana sat at the kitchen table and watched him work. You talk about your wife a lot, she observed. You must have loved her very much. Jake paused in his stirring. 20 years of marriage. She was my best friend, my partner in everything. When she got sick, he shook his head. I thought I might follow her when she died. Couldn't see the point of anything without her. But you didn't. No. Catherine made me promise to keep living. Said she didn't want her death to kill me too. Jake poured batter onto the hot griddle. Been 3 years now, and I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. Ayana was quiet for a moment. My grandmother used to say that sometimes the spirits send us exactly what we need, even when we don't know we need it. Is that what happened here? The spirits sent you to my barn? A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Maybe they sent me to you, or maybe they sent you to me. Over breakfast, Jake learned small things about Ayana without breaking his promise not to ask direct questions. She knew a lot about horses. She could tell from his kitchen window that his mare was favoring her left front hoof. She spoke at least 3 languages fluently, and she had medical training of some kind because she redid her own bandages with professional skill. Were you a nurse? Jake asked, watching her work. Something like that, she said vaguely. I worked at the clinic on the reservation for a while until... She stopped herself. I learned to take care of injuries. That afternoon, Jake had to check on his cattle. The storm had damaged part of his fence line, and he needed to make repairs before his herd wandered off. He was reluctant to leave Ayana alone, but she insisted she would be fine. I promise I won't try to leave again, she said. At least not today. Jake gathered his tools and headed out to the damaged section of fence. The work was hot and exhausting, but it felt good to use his hands again. He had been neglecting the ranch lately, letting things slide because he couldn't find motivation for much of anything. He was so focused on replacing a broken fence post that he almost missed the sound of a vehicle approaching on the dirt road that led to his property. Jake straightened up and shaded his eyes with his hand. A black SUV was making its way toward his house, moving slowly and deliberately. Jake's blood ran cold. In 3 years of living here, he had never seen that vehicle before. And something about the way it moved, careful, searching, made his instincts scream danger. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house, his boots pounding on the hard-packed earth. The SUV was still a quarter-mile away, but getting closer. Jake burst through his back door and found Ayana in the kitchen, washing dishes. We have company, he said breathlessly. Black SUV looks official. You need to hide now. The color drained from Ayana's face. Without a word, she dried her hands and moved quickly toward the guest bedroom. Jake followed her, his mind racing. The closet, he said, opening the door to reveal hanging clothes and storage boxes. Get in the back behind the winter coats. Ayana didn't argue. She squeezed into the closet and pulled the coats around her. If they ask about me, I've never seen you, Jake said firmly. I don't know anything. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from his front yard. Jake closed the closet door and tried to calm his racing heart. He walked to the living room and looked out the window. Two men in dark suits were approaching his front porch. They didn't look like local law enforcement. Jake opened the door before they could knock. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The taller man flashed a badge too quickly for Jake to read it properly. "Federal agents. We're looking for someone who might have passed through this area. A woman, Native American, probably injured." "I haven't seen anyone like that," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "What did she do?" "That's classified," the shorter agent said. His eyes were cold and unfriendly. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Just to be thorough." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "Actually, I do mind." "You got a warrant?" The agents exchanged glances. "We're just trying to locate a dangerous fugitive, Mr. Morrison. She's wanted in connection with a serious crime. If you're harboring her, you could be charged as an accessory. Like I said, I haven't seen anyone." Jake stepped back and started to close the door. "If you want to search my property, come back with proper paperwork." The tall agent put his foot in the door. "Are you sure you want to make this difficult? We're the good guys here." Something about the way he said it made Jake's skin crawl. These men didn't feel like good guys. They felt like the kind of danger Ayanna was running from. "Get off my property," Jake said firmly. "Now." The agent stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Morrison, and we'll be watching." Jake watched from his window as they drove away, his heart still pounding. When their vehicle disappeared over the horizon, he went to let Ayanna out of the closet. She emerged pale and shaking. Did they say they were federal agents? They flashed badges, but something didn't feel right about them. Jake sat down heavily on the bed. "Ayanna, what kind of trouble are you really in?" "Because those men weren't here to help anyone." For the first time since he found her, Ayanna looked like she might tell him the truth. She sat down beside him, her hands twisted in her lap. "Jake, what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything, and it's going to put your life in danger just knowing it." Jake looked into her frightened eyes and made his choice. "Tell me." Ayanna took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 weeks ago, I was working late at the tribal health clinic. I'm not just a nurse, Jake, I'm also a traditional healer. People come to me when modern medicine isn't enough, when they need old remedies and ceremonies. Jake listened without interrupting, sensing that this was hard for her to share. "There's a sacred site about 10 miles from the reservation, a place where my ancestors gathered healing plants for generations. It's supposed to be protected land, but lately, strange things have been happening there. People going missing. Sounds in the night that don't belong." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape. "My cousin Tommy asked me to meet him there that night. Said he had something important to show me. Something that would explain the strange activities. I should have known it was a trap." "What did you find?" Jake asked gently. Ayanna turned back to him, tears in her eyes. "Bodies, Jake. 3 men, all Apache, all people who had been asking questions about the sacred site. And Tommy. My cousin was one of them." Jake felt his stomach drop. "You witnessed a murder scene." "Worse than that. I witnessed the murder. As I was examining the bodies, trying to understand what happened, I heard vehicles approaching. I hid behind some rocks and watched as 2 men in expensive suits talked with someone I recognized. Deputy Frank Yazzie from the tribal police. They were discussing how to dispose of the bodies and cover up what really happened at the site." "The deputy was involved?" Ayanna nodded. "He was taking money from these men. A lot of money. They were using the sacred site for something illegal, and anyone who got too close ended up dead." She touched the bandage on her head. "I tried to leave quietly, but I stepped on some loose rocks. They heard me." Jake could picture the scene, Ayanna alone in the darkness, discovering her cousin's murder and then being hunted by the killers. "I ran," she continued. "They shot at me as I fled through the desert. That's how I got this." She gestured to her arm. "I've been hiding and running for 3 weeks, trying to stay alive long enough to get evidence to the right people." "What kind of evidence?" Ayanna reached into her boot and pulled out a small digital camera. Pictures of the murder scene. Audio recordings of the conversations I overheard. Names, dates, license plate numbers. Everything I could gather before they started hunting me. Jake stared at the camera. Such a small device, but it contained information that people were willing to kill for. "Have you tried going to the FBI? Real federal agents, not the fake ones who came here today? How do I know who's real and who's not? The corruption goes deep, Jake. Tribal police, county sheriff, maybe even state level. I don't know who I can trust. She sat back down, exhaustion clear in her voice. All I know is that innocent people are dying, and no one seems to care because they're Apache. Jake felt anger building in his chest. He had seen the casual racism that still existed in this part of Arizona, the way some people treated Native Americans as less than human. There have to be honest law enforcement officers somewhere. Maybe. But finding them without getting killed first is the problem. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, Jake spoke. Those men who came here today, they're part of this conspiracy? Probably. Or hired by the people who are. Ayanna looked at him with concern. Jake, I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. I never meant for you to get involved. I got myself involved the moment I decided to help you. Jake stood up and began pacing. The question now is, what do we do next? We don't do anything. I leave tonight before they come back with more men and more weapons. No. Jake's voice was firm. You're not leaving. Not until we figure out a way to get that evidence to people who can act on it. Ayanna shook her head. You don't understand how dangerous these people are. They've killed at least 3 people that I know of, probably more. They won't hesitate to kill you too. Maybe not. But I won't let them kill you either. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at her. I lost Catherine to cancer, and there was nothing I could do to save her. I'm not losing someone else to violence when I have the power to help. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Ayanna didn't argue further. Instead, she asked, What are you thinking? I'm thinking we need to be smarter than they are. You know this land and I know how to live off it. We use those advantages while we figure out how to get your evidence to honest federal agents. Over the next few days, an unexpected partnership developed between them. Ayanna proved to be remarkably skilled at ranch work. She could handle horses better than most cowboys Jake had known, and she understood cattle behavior instinctively. More importantly, she knew the desert landscape in ways that could keep them alive if they had to run. Jake found himself looking forward to their conversations during meals and evening chores. Ayanna was intelligent and funny when she let her guard down. She told him stories about growing up on the reservation, about her grandmother who had taught her traditional healing methods, about the struggles her people faced trying to preserve their culture in a modern world. In return, Jake shared memories of Catherine and their life together. He talked about his dreams of expanding the ranch, his love of the land, and his struggles with loneliness since his wife's death. Catherine would have liked you, he said one evening as they watched the sunset from his back porch. She always said I needed someone who could challenge me intellectually. Ayanna smiled. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Sometimes I think she's still looking out for me somehow. Jake glanced at Ayanna. Maybe she guided you to my barn that night. Maybe she did. As the days passed, Jake noticed changes in both of them. Ayanna gradually relaxed her constant vigilance, sleeping better at night and laughing more often during the day. Her injuries healed quickly and color returned to her cheeks. For his part, Jake found himself caring about the future again. He started making plans for improvements to the ranch, thinking about planting a garden next spring, considering getting a dog for companionship. The crushing loneliness that had defined his life since Catherine's death began to lift. One morning, while they were repairing a water trough together, Ayanna asked, What will you do when this is all over? When I'm no longer in danger and can leave? Jake paused in his work. The question had been haunting him too, though he hadn't wanted to voice it. I guess I'll go back to being a lonely rancher in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't have to be that way. Their eyes met across the water trough, and Jake felt something shift between them. What had started as simple human compassion was growing into something deeper. He could see in Ayanna's face that she felt it too. But before either of them could say more, they heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching.
Multiple vehicles this time, moving fast across the desert toward the ranch. They're back, Ayanna said,
fear returning to her voice. Jake looked toward the approaching dust clouds and counted at least 3 vehicles. And they brought friends. This time, running and hiding wouldn't be enough. This time, they would have to fight. The vehicles turned out to be a false alarm, just Jake's neighbor from the next ranch over, bringing back a stray calf that had wandered through a broken fence. But the scare forced Jake and Ayanna to face reality. Their peaceful few days together were borrowed time, and their enemies would return eventually. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Ayanna finally told Jake the complete truth about what she had discovered at the sacred site. It wasn't just murder. Jake, it was much bigger than that. She pulled out a small notebook from her jacket pocket. I've been piecing together everything I saw and heard that night, plus things I've remembered from before the killings started. Jake moved closer as she opened the notebook, revealing pages of careful handwriting and sketch diagrams. The sacred site sits on top of a network of natural caves that my people have known about for centuries. They're deep and complex, stretching for miles underground, perfect for hiding things. Ayanna pointed to one of her sketches. The men I overheard that night weren't just disposing of bodies. They were using the caves to store and transport something valuable. Drugs? That's what I thought at first. But then I remembered something my cousin Tommy had told me weeks before he died. He said he'd seen tribal artifacts disappearing from the cultural center. Ancient pottery, jewelry, ceremonial items that are sacred to our people. Jake frowned. Someone is stealing Apache artifacts? Not just stealing them, using them. Ayanna turned to another page in her notebook. The men that night talked about shipments and buyers in Mexico. I think they're smuggling stolen artifacts across the border, using the sacred caves as a staging area. But why kill people over stolen artifacts? I mean, they're valuable, but Ayanna's expression grew grim. Because they're not just using the artifacts as merchandise, Jake. They're hollowing them out and filling them with drugs before shipping them to buyers. Ancient pottery filled with cocaine. Traditional jewelry hiding heroin. It's the perfect smuggling operation. Who's going to suspect ceremonial Apache items of containing drugs? The enormity of what she was describing hit Jake like a physical blow. They're desecrating sacred objects to smuggle drugs, and killing anyone who gets close to discovering it. My cousin Tommy worked part-time at the cultural center. He must have figured out what was happening to the missing artifacts. Ayanna's voice broke slightly. 3 good men died because they tried to protect our heritage. Jake stood up and began pacing again, his mind racing. The fake federal agents who came here, they're probably part of the smuggling operation. Maybe private security hired by the real criminals. Which means the corruption goes even higher than tribal level. This is organized crime, Jake. Professional criminals with lots of money and no conscience. They spent the next hour going through everything Ayanna had documented. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Based on her observations and Tommy's information, hundreds of priceless Apache artifacts had been stolen over the past year. The profit from both the artifacts themselves and their use as drug containers would be enormous. We need to get this information to someone who can act on it, Jake said. But who? If we can't trust local law enforcement, Ayanna had been thinking about the same problem. There's an FBI agent I met once at a conference about crimes against Native Americans. Agent Linda Chen. She works out of the Phoenix office and specializes in investigating crimes on reservation land. You think you can trust her? I think she's our best option. The question is how to contact her without tipping off the people who are hunting me. Jake had an idea. My neighbor, the one who brought back my calf today, his son works for the phone company. He might be able to help us make contact without using phones that could be monitored. It was a slim hope, but it was something. They agreed that Jake would drive to his neighbor's ranch the next morning and see if he could arrange secure communication with Agent Chen. But first, they had to make it through another night. Around midnight, Jake was awakened by a sound he couldn't identify at first. He lay in bed listening, trying to place it. Then he realized what it was. Someone was walking around his property trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. Jake slipped out of bed and grabbed his rifle from the closet. He crept to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see his yard clearly. 3 men were moving carefully around his house and barn, staying in the shadows but definitely searching for something. Or someone. Jake made his way quietly to the guest bedroom. Ayanna, he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. Wake up. They're here. She was instantly alert, years of running having trained her to wake up ready for danger. How many? 3 that I can see. Maybe more. Jake checked his rifle to make sure it was loaded. We need to get out of the house. Ayanna was already pulling on her boots. The barn? Too obvious. But I have another idea. Jake led her to the kitchen and opened what looked like a pantry door. Behind the shelves of canned goods was another door, hidden and narrow. Storm cellar. My grandfather built it during the Depression. Most people don't know it exists. The hidden cellar was small and cramped, but it was well concealed and had ventilation. Jake had stocked it with emergency supplies years ago and forgotten about it until now. They squeezed inside and Jake carefully closed both doors behind them. From above, they could hear footsteps entering the house. The men weren't being subtle anymore. They were searching room by room, overturning furniture and opening closets. "Morrison," one of them called out. "We know she's here. Make this easy on yourself and hand her over." Jake and Ayanna huddled together in the darkness of the cellar, barely breathing. The footsteps moved through the house for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, they heard voices arguing outside. "She's not here, but someone's definitely been staying in that guest room. Search the barn and the other buildings. They can't have gone far." More waiting, more hiding, more fear. But eventually the sounds faded and vehicles drove away. Jake and Ayanna remained in the cellar for another hour before emerging, shaky and exhausted. The house was a disaster. Every room had been torn apart, furniture overturned, belongings scattered everywhere. But worse than the destruction was the message it sent. These people weren't giving up. They would keep coming until they found Ayanna. As they surveyed the damage in the morning light, Jake felt his anger building into something cold and determined. These criminals had invaded his home, threatened his life, and were hunting an innocent woman who was only trying to seek justice for her murdered cousin. "We're not running anymore," he told Ayanna as they stood in his destroyed living room. "It's time to take the fight to them." Ayanna looked at him with surprise. "Jake, these people are killers. We can't fight them with just the two of us, maybe not. But we can be smarter than them. We know this land better than they do. We know what they're doing and where they're doing it. And now we know they're getting desperate." Jake picked up an overturned chair and set it upright. "Desperate people make mistakes. What are you thinking?" Jake looked out the window toward the direction of the sacred site where this had all started. "I'm thinking it's time to gather some evidence of our own, and maybe set a trap while we're at it." Jake's plan was risky but simple. If they could get close enough to the sacred site to gather fresh evidence of the smuggling operation, they might have enough proof to convince Agent Chen to take action. But first, they needed to contact her safely. The next morning, Jake drove to his neighbor's ranch while Ayanna stayed hidden in the storm cellar. Tom Bradley had been ranching in the area for 30 years and minded his own business, but he was a good man who believed in helping neighbors. "Jake, you look like hell," Tom said, greeting him at the door. "What's going on?" Jake had prepared a story that was mostly true. "I've stumbled onto something illegal happening on reservation land. Drug smuggling, maybe worse. I need to contact the FBI without using my own phone in case someone's monitoring it." Tom's weathered face grew serious. "This have anything to do with those Apache folks who've gone missing lately?" "Probably." Jake was surprised that Tom knew about the disappearances. "How much have you heard?" "More than I like. My ranch hands have been finding things they shouldn't find. Tire tracks in places where no one should be driving, trash that doesn't belong, and twice in the past month we've heard gunshots coming from the direction of the old sacred site." Tom agreed to help. His son managed the local cell phone tower and could arrange for Jake to use an untraceable connection to call the FBI. Within an hour, Jake was speaking to Agent Linda Chen in Phoenix. "Agent Chen, my name is Jake Morrison. I have information about murders and drug smuggling involving Apache artifacts on the San Carlos reservation." There was a pause. "Mr. Morrison, can you be more specific about what you've witnessed?" Jake explained Ayanna's situation carefully, leaving out her location but providing details about the murdered men and the evidence she had gathered. Agent Chen listened without interrupting. "Mr. Morrison, the woman you're describing, Ayanna Yazi, is someone we've been trying to locate for 3 weeks. Not to arrest her, but to protect her. We've received intelligence about a criminal organization targeting witnesses to their activities." Jake felt relief wash over him. "So you know about the smuggling operation?" "We suspected it, but we needed proof. If Miss Yazi has evidence of what you're describing, she could be the key to breaking up a major international smuggling ring." Agent Chen's voice became urgent. "Where is she now?" "We need to get her into protective custody immediately. She's safe for the moment, but barely. The people hunting her found my ranch yesterday. They're getting more aggressive. Can you bring her to Phoenix? We can arrange a secure meeting." Jake thought about the black SUVs and the men who had torn apart his house. I don't think we can make it that far without being spotted. These people seem to have resources and connections everywhere. Agent Chen was quiet for a moment, thinking. There's a small FBI field office in Globe, about 40 miles from your location. If you can get Miss Yazzie there safely, we can take her into protection and review her evidence. When? Tonight, if possible. Every day she remains exposed increases the danger to both of you. Jake agreed to attempt the journey to Globe that evening. The timing would work in their favor. Darkness would provide cover, and the criminals might not expect them to move so boldly after the previous night's search. When Jake returned to his ranch, he found Ayanna pacing nervously in the storm cellar. The confined space was making her claustrophobic, and the stress of constant hiding was wearing on her. Agent Chen believes you, Jake told her. She wants to meet with you tonight in Globe. Ayanna's reaction surprised him. Instead of relief, her face showed fear and suspicion. How do we know this isn't a trap? How do we know this Agent Chen is really who she says she is? Jake had anticipated this concern. Tom Bradley's son checked her out. Agent Linda Chen is real. She works out of Phoenix and she specializes in crimes on Native American land. Plus, she knew details about the case that only a real federal agent would know, or someone who's part of the conspiracy. Jake sat down beside her in the cramped cellar. Ayanna, we can't stay hidden forever. Eventually, they're going to find us. At least this way we're taking action instead of just reacting. She was quiet for a long time, weighing their options. If this goes wrong, Jake, if this Agent Chen isn't who she claims to be, then we'll deal with it together. But I think this is our best chance to end this nightmare. That afternoon, they spent time preparing for the journey to Globe. Jake mapped out back roads that would avoid main highways where they might be spotted. Ayanna gathered all her evidence, the camera, her notebook, and several items she had taken from Tommy's belongings that supported her story. As evening approached, they noticed increased activity around the ranch. Strange vehicles drove slowly past on the main road, and Jake spotted men with binoculars watching his property from distant hills. The sight made his blood run cold. They're setting up for something big tonight, Ayanna observed, peering through the cellar's small window. Look at how many of them there are now. Jake counted at least 6 different observation points around his property. They probably think we'll try to run. They're right, but not in the direction they expect. At sunset, Jake made a show of checking his cattle in the pasture closest to the road, making sure the watchers could see him following his normal routine. He acted tired and defeated, hoping to convince them that he was just going through the motions of ranch work. Meanwhile, Ayanna slipped out the back of the house and made her way to where Jake had hidden his truck behind a grove of trees. The plan was to wait until full darkness, then drive cross-country using ranch roads and cattle trails to reach the highway several miles from Jake's property. From there, they would take back roads to Globe, avoiding the main routes where roadblocks might be waiting. As they waited in the truck for full darkness, Jake noticed how quiet Ayanna had become. The stress of the past weeks was evident in her face, but there was something else too, a sadness that went deeper than fear. What is it? He asked. I keep thinking about Tommy, about the other men who died. What if we're too late? What if the evidence I have isn't enough to stop these people? She stared out at the desert landscape that held so many memories for her people. What if more innocent people die because I wasn't brave enough to act sooner? Jake reached over and took her hand. You've been incredibly brave, Ayanna. You survived when they tried to kill you. You gathered evidence when anyone else would have just run. And you're still fighting for justice even though it puts your life at risk. But what if it's not enough? Then we'll have tried. That's more than anyone else has been able to do. Jake squeezed her hand. Your cousin Tommy would be proud of you for not giving up. Ayanna was quiet for a moment, then said, Jake, there's something I need to tell you. About after this is over, I mean. She looked out at the desert landscape. Even if Agent Chen can protect me, even if we stop the smuggling operation, I can't stay here. Too many people know my face now. I'll have to relocate, probably far away from Arizona. The words hit Jake harder than he expected. Over the past week, he had begun to imagine a future that included Ayanna. The thought of her leaving, of returning to his empty ranch and lonely life, filled him with dread. Maybe, he said carefully, you wouldn't have to go alone. Ayanna turned to look at him in the darkness. Jake, you can't give up your life, your ranch, everything you've built here. What life? Before you came, I was just existing, not living. Catherine wanted me to find happiness again, and for the first time in 3 years I have. Jake looked into her eyes. Maybe Catherine guided you to my barn that night for more reasons than just keeping you alive. Jake. Ayana's voice was soft with emotion. We don't have to decide anything tonight. Let's just focus on getting through this safely, but I want you to know that whatever happens, you're not alone anymore. But even as he said it, Jake knew that his feelings for Ayana had grown beyond simple protectiveness. Somewhere between finding her in his barn and planning their escape together, he had fallen in love with her courage, her intelligence, and her determination to seek justice despite the personal cost. At 10 o'clock, with the moon hidden behind clouds, they began their dangerous journey to Globe. Jake drove without headlights for the first mile, navigating by memory and starlight across terrain he had known since childhood. The truck bounced and lurched over rough ground, but the engine ran quietly. Behind them, light still moved across his property as their hunters searched for them once again. But this time, Jake and Ayana weren't just running away. They were running toward something, toward justice, toward safety, and toward a future that neither of them could have imagined just days before. The desert night was dark and dangerous, but for the first time since this nightmare began, they weren't facing it alone. Whatever happened in Globe, whatever Agent Chen decided to do with Ayana's evidence, they would face it together. As they reached the main highway and Jake finally turned on his headlights, he realized that the scared, injured woman he had found in his barn had become the strongest, most courageous person he had ever known. And despite all the danger they still faced, he felt lucky to be making this journey with her. The hunt was far from over, but the prey had become the hunters. And by morning, everything would change. The journey to Globe started smoothly. Jake's knowledge of the back roads served them well, and they made good time across the dark desert. But 20 miles from their destination, everything went wrong. Red and blue lights appeared in Jake's rearview mirror, not the flashing lights of police cars, but the steady glow of vehicles following them. Jake pressed harder on the gas pedal, but the lights stayed with them, matching their speed perfectly. They found us, Ayana said, her voice tight with fear. How? We were so careful. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel as he pushed his truck faster than was safe on the winding mountain road. It doesn't matter how. What matters is what we do now. Ayana checked the load on her pistol, a weapon Jake hadn't known she carried until this moment. Can we make it to Globe? Jake looked at the speedometer, then at the treacherous road ahead. Not at this speed. And even if we could, how do we know the FBI office isn't compromised too? The decision was made for them when bright headlights appeared ahead, blocking the road. They were trapped between two groups of vehicles, with nowhere to run except into the desert darkness. Jake slammed on the brakes and turned his truck toward a barely visible ranch road that led back toward his property. We're going home, he said grimly. Jake, that's exactly where they expect us to go. Maybe, but it's also where I have the best chance of keeping us alive. The chase across the desert was terrifying. Jake's truck bounced and lurched over rough terrain while their pursuers followed relentlessly. Twice Jake nearly lost control on steep slopes, and once they scraped through a narrow canyon with inches to spare on either side. But Jake's intimate knowledge of the land gave them just enough advantage to stay ahead. He knew every wash, every ridge, every shortcut that could save precious seconds, and gradually he began to execute a plan that had been forming in his mind since the chase began. Ayana, do you remember the storm cellar where you hid? Of course. There's something I never told you about it. It's not just a cellar. It's connected to a network of old mining tunnels that run under this whole area. My grandfather used them during Prohibition to hide alcohol from federal agents. Understanding dawned on Ayana's face. We can get into the tunnels and disappear. Better than that. We can get into the tunnels and come up behind them. Jake drove straight for his ranch, making no attempt to hide their destination. As he expected, their pursuers followed, probably confident that they had their prey cornered at last. But as they approached the ranch buildings, Jake suddenly veered toward the old barn where this whole adventure had started. He drove the truck directly through the barn's rear doors, which he had left open earlier in case of emergency. The truck came to a stop inside, hidden from view. Jake and Ayana jumped out and ran for the concealed entrance to the tunnels, not through the house this time, but through a hidden opening in the barn's floor that Jake's grandfather had built for exactly this kind of situation. Above them, they could hear vehicles surrounding the ranch buildings and men shouting orders. Flashlight beams swept through the barn, but the tunnel entrance was so well concealed that their hunters walked right over it without noticing. "There's the truck," someone yelled. "They're in here somewhere." Jake and Ayanna crawled through the narrow tunnel by feel, following a route Jake had explored as a child but hadn't used in decades. The tunnel was cramped and musty, but it was dry and stable. More importantly, it led to exactly where they needed to be. 20 minutes later, they emerged from a concealed exit behind a cluster of rocks about 50 yards from the barn. From their hiding spot, they could see the men who had been hunting them, 6 armed figures in dark clothing, moving with military precision as they searched the buildings. "These aren't just local criminals," Ayanna whispered. "Look at their equipment, their coordination." "These are professionals," Jake had to agree. The men moved like soldiers or mercenaries, not like the small-time crooks he had expected. This smuggling operation was apparently worth a lot of money to a lot of dangerous people. "Can you identify any of them?" Jake asked. Ayanna studied the figures carefully. "The tall one giving orders. That's Deputy Yazzie from Tribal Police. I recognize his voice. And the one with the limp is Buck Morrison, a local guide who knows these mountains as well as you do." "Morrison? Any relation to you?" "Distant cousin, unfortunately. He's been in trouble with the law before, but never anything this serious." They watched as the men systematically searched every building on the ranch. When they didn't find their quarry, the leader, Deputy Yazzie, began issuing new orders. "They're not here, but they can't have gone far on foot. Rodriguez, take 2 men and check the other ranch buildings. Buck, you and Steven start a grid search of the immediate area. They're hiding somewhere close." As the men began to spread out, Jake realized they had a narrow window of opportunity. Most of them are leaving. "If we can take out the ones who stay behind..." "Jake, these men are killers. We can't just attack them." "We're not attacking them. We're gathering evidence." Jake pointed toward the barn. "Look what they're doing." Deputy Yazzie and 1 other man had remained at the barn and were unloading equipment from their vehicles. But not search equipment. They were setting up what looked like a sophisticated radio array and computer equipment. "They're establishing a command post," Ayanna realized. "This isn't just about finding us anymore. They're coordinating something bigger." Jake pulled out his cell phone. "If I can get close enough to record what they're saying, we might finally have the proof we need that this goes all the way to the top." It was dangerous, but it was also their best chance. Using the tunnel system, Jake made his way back under the barn while Ayanna provided watch from their hiding spot. The old mining tunnels had several access points, including one that opened directly under the barn's main floor. Jake could hear Deputy Yazzie's voice clearly through the thin boards above his head. He activated his phone's recording app and listened to the conversation that confirmed all of Ayanna's suspicions. "The shipment goes out tomorrow night regardless," Yazzie was saying into his radio. "We've been planning this for months, and we're not going to let one Apache woman screw it up now." "What about the rancher?" asked the other voice. "Collateral damage. Once we find them, they both disappear permanently. Make it look like they ran off together and got lost in the desert." "And the investigation?" Yazzie laughed coldly. "What investigation?" "I'm the investigating officer. As far as anyone will know, Jake Morrison helped a wanted fugitive escape justice, and they both died trying to flee across the border." Jake's blood ran cold as he realized how thoroughly they had been set up. The fake federal agents, the systematic searches, even the chase tonight. It was all designed to isolate them and create a cover story for their murder. But as Jake listened, he learned something that changed everything. The criminal organization wasn't just smuggling stolen artifacts and drugs. Tomorrow night, they were planning to move their entire operation, including evidence that could implicate dozens of corrupt officials throughout Arizona and Mexico. "Phoenix wants everything cleaned up by Thursday," Yazzie continued. "After tomorrow's shipment, we shut down this site permanently and move to the New Mexico location." This was their chance to stop not just the local smuggling ring, but the entire network. Jake recorded everything he could, then carefully made his way back through the tunnels to where Ayanna was waiting. "We got them," he whispered, showing her the phone recording. "But we have to act fast. They're shutting down the operation tomorrow night." Ayanna listened to the recording with growing excitement and dread. "Jake, this proves everything I've been saying. But how do we get it to Agent Chen without getting killed first?" Jake looked back toward the barn where Deputy Yazzie was still coordinating the search for them. We don't run this time, Ayana. Tomorrow night, when they make their final shipment, we're going to be there to document everything. And then we're going to make sure Agent Chen gets all the evidence she needs to shut down this whole network. That's suicide. Jake, there will be dozens of them. Maybe. But it's also justice for your cousin Tommy and all the other people these criminals have hurt. Jake took her hand in the darkness. Besides, I've got a secret weapon they don't know about. What's that? Jake smiled grimly. You. And the fact that we're fighting on our home ground now. As they made their way back through the tunnels toward safety, Jake began planning the most dangerous night of their lives. Tomorrow they would go from being the hunted to being the hunters, and by dawn either justice would finally be served or they would both be dead. The next evening, Jake and Ayana positioned themselves on a ridge overlooking the sacred site where this nightmare had begun. Through binoculars, they watched as vehicles arrived throughout the afternoon. Trucks, SUVs, and even a helicopter that landed in a clearing near the cave entrance. There must be 20 people down there, Ayana whispered. This is bigger than we thought. Jake continued recording everything with his phone's camera. The operation unfolding below them was massive and well organized. Men in expensive suits supervised as workers loaded wooden crates from the caves into waiting vehicles. Even from a distance, Jake could see the glint of artifacts and pottery being packed alongside what were obviously packages of drugs. Look. Ayana pointed toward a group of people near the helicopter. That's not just Deputy Yazzie. I recognize at least 3 other tribal officials and 2 county sheriff's deputies. Jake zoomed in with his phone camera, capturing clear images of corrupt officials supervising an international smuggling operation. Agent Chen is going to have more evidence than she knows what to do with. But as the sun set and the criminals prepared for their final night of operations, Jake realized their plan had a fatal flaw. They were too far away to gather the detailed evidence that would be needed in court. Audio recordings, clear photographs of faces, license plate numbers, they needed to get much closer. Ayana, I have to go down there. Absolutely not. That's suicide. Not if we're smart about it. Jake pulled out a hand-drawn map of the cave system that he had made from childhood memories and Ayana's descriptions. Remember, your people have known about these caves for generations. There has to be another way in and out besides the main entrance they're using. Ayana studied the map, then looked down at the criminal activity below. There is. A smaller entrance about half a mile north hidden behind a rockfall. But Jake, even if you can get inside without being seen, how do you get out again? The same way you escaped that first night? I create a distraction and run like hell. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. As darkness fell, Jake made his way carefully down the ridge toward the hidden cave entrance. Ayana remained on the ridge with his truck, ready to provide backup or evacuation if everything went wrong. The secondary cave entrance was even more concealed than Ayana had described. Jake had to squeeze through a gap between boulders that barely allowed his shoulders to pass. But once inside, the cave opened up into the same network of chambers that the criminals were using. Jake could hear voices and see lights ahead as he crept through the underground passages. The caves were larger than he had expected, with multiple chambers connected by narrow tunnels. The main chamber where the criminals were working was lit by powerful portable lights, making it easy for Jake to stay hidden in the darker side passages. What he saw made his stomach turn. Hundreds of priceless Apache artifacts were stacked along the cave walls. Pottery, jewelry, ceremonial masks, and traditional weapons that belonged in museums or with the tribal people who had created them. Many had been crudely hollowed out and filled with packages of white powder before being resealed. Jake recorded everything, getting close enough to capture license plates, faces, and clear evidence of the drug packaging operation. But the most important discovery came when he overheard a conversation between Deputy Yazzie and a man in an expensive suit who was obviously the operation's leader. After tonight, we're done with Arizona, the suit was saying. Too much heat from the FBI. We move everything to the New Mexico site and lay low for 6 months. What about the woman and the rancher? Yazzie asked. They're dead by morning one way or another, and their bodies will never be found. The man's voice was cold and matter-of-fact. This whole area is going to have an unfortunate mining accident tomorrow. Cave-in will bury all the evidence and anyone stupid enough to be poking around where they don't belong. Jake's blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to kill him and Ayana. They were going to destroy the entire sacred site to cover their tracks. Generations of Apache history would be buried forever. As Jake prepared to retreat with his evidence, disaster struck. One of the workers spotted the light from his phone camera reflected off a cave wall. Shouts echoed through the chambers as armed men began searching the side passages. Jake ran through the dark tunnels, guided only by memory and desperation. Behind him, flashlight beams cut through the darkness and voices coordinated the search. He was almost to the hidden entrance when a shot rang out, and rock fragments exploded near his head. There, in the north passage. More shots followed as Jake squeezed through the narrow entrance. A bullet grazed his shoulder, but he kept moving. Once outside, he ran up the ridge toward Ayanna and his truck, knowing that every second counted. Jake! Ayanna had heard the gunshots and was already starting the engine. Are you hit? Just a scratch. But we've got bigger problems. Jake climbed into the passenger seat, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. They're planning to destroy the whole site tomorrow with explosives. We have to get this evidence to Agent Chen tonight, or it'll be too late. Ayanna drove like a professional stunt driver, navigating the dark mountain roads at dangerous speeds while Jake used his phone to upload all the video and audio evidence to a secure cloud storage account. If they didn't survive the night, at least the evidence would. They reached the FBI field office in Globe just as Agent Chen was arriving with a full tactical team. Jake's phone call from the road had finally convinced her that the situation was critical. Mr. Morrison, Miss Yazzie. Agent Chen greeted them as they stumbled into the FBI office. You both look like you've been through hell. We have, Jake said, showing her his recorded evidence. But we got what you need to stop them. The next 6 hours were a blur of debriefings, evidence review, and coordinated law enforcement action. Agent Chen's team moved fast, coordinating with honest tribal police, state investigators, and federal agencies to surround the sacred site before the criminals could escape. At dawn, Jake and Ayanna watched from a safe distance as FBI agents arrested Deputy Yazzie, the mysterious man in the expensive suit, and dozens of other conspirators. The cave was secured before it could be destroyed, preserving both evidence and sacred Apache artifacts. It's over, Ayanna said, leaning against Jake as they watched the arrests. Finally over. But even as the criminals were led away in handcuffs, Jake realized that ending the nightmare was only the beginning. Agent Chen had explained that Ayanna would need to testify in multiple trials, possibly spending months in protective custody. Their time together was far from guaranteed. 3 weeks later, after the initial wave of arrests and media attention had died down, Jake found Ayanna sitting on his front porch watching the sunrise over the desert. Her injuries had healed completely, and the constant fear that had shadowed her face was finally gone. Agent Chen says I can go anywhere I want now, she told him. Full protection, new identity if I need it, relocation assistance. The FBI is very grateful for what we did. Jake sat down beside her, his heart heavy. Where will you go? That depends, Ayanna said quietly. On whether a certain rancher wants company. Jake turned to look at her, hardly daring to hope. Ayanna, are you saying... I'm saying that home isn't a place, Jake. It's being with the people who matter to you. She took his hand. You saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me hope when I had none, purpose when I felt lost, and... She paused, searching for the right words. You gave me love when I thought I'd never trust anyone again. Jake felt tears in his eyes. I love you too. But what about your people, your culture? This ranch is pretty isolated from the reservation. Ayanna smiled. Agent Chen told me something interesting. The federal government is looking for someone to manage the cultural preservation program for the recovered artifacts. Someone who understands both traditional Apache culture and modern legal procedures. That sounds perfect for you. It would be if I had somewhere to live nearby. Somewhere with a good man who doesn't mind sharing his home with an Apache woman who talks too much and has a dangerous past. Jake pulled her close, feeling happiness flood through him for the first time since Catherine's death. I think that could be arranged. 6 months later, Jake stood in the same barn where he had first found Ayanna, but everything had changed. The barn had been converted into a workshop where Ayanna restored damaged artifacts and taught traditional Apache crafts to visitors. The ranch had become a cultural center where people came to learn about Native American history and the importance of preserving sacred sites. More importantly, Jake's house was no longer empty. Ayana had filled it with laughter, purpose, and love. She had helped him plant the garden that Catherine had always wanted, and together they had built a life that honored both their pasts and their shared future. "You know what I realized?" Jake said to Ayana as they worked together in the morning light, cataloging artifacts that would be returned to the Apache people. "What's that?" "Catherine always said that everything happens for a reason. I used to think that was just something people say to make sense of tragedy." Jake looked around the barn, now filled with purpose and hope instead of hiding and fear. "But maybe she was right. Maybe you needed to find me as much as I needed to find you."